November 7th, 1944, Morville-Levi, France. The pencil moved across the page of Oberst Friedrich Hartmann's field journal, recording words that contradicted everything the Wehrmacht had been taught about racial hierarchy. These Negro tankers fight with precision we did not expect. Their coordination exceeds many German units I have witnessed. Either our intelligence has failed us completely, or we have been deliberately misled about the capabilities of these soldiers. Through his binoculars, he had just witnessed something that shattered 3 years of Nazi racial propaganda. Black American tankers maneuvering Sherman tanks with tactical sophistication that matched or exceeded veteran Wehrmacht panzer crews. An armored thrust that broke through German defensive positions in less than 4 hours. In Germany, the party leadership had assured the Wehrmacht that African soldiers were primitives, incapable of modern warfare, unable to operate complex machinery. Yet, here, in what Nazi ideology had described as America's weakest racial element, black soldiers commanded 30-ton steel machines with deadly efficiency. 712 men of the 761st Tank Battalion had just entered combat for the first time, not in a supporting role, not in a limited capacity, but as the spearhead of Patton's Third Army offensive into northeastern France. The entire German defensive line had prepared to face what they believed would be an easy victory against inferior troops. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger the most profound challenge to Nazi racial theory since the war began, a systematic demolition of white supremacist ideology through the sheer demonstration of black military excellence. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics of ideological collapse were being written not in propaganda leaflets, but in combat statistics that would soon shatter every assumption Wehrmacht soldiers carried about race, capability, and the nature of military prowess. The journey to this moment had begun on April 1st, 1942 at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated as part of an experiment the United States Army didn't fully believe in. American military doctrine in 1942 held that black soldiers were unsuitable for combat roles. Decades of institutional racism had relegated African Americans to labor battalions, mess duties, and service positions. The creation of the 761st represented a grudging concession to political pressure from black newspapers and civil rights organizations, not a genuine commitment to integrated warfare. Among the men who reported to Camp Claiborne was 23-year-old Reuben Rivers, born in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and raised in Hotulka, half Cherokee, half black. Rivers had worked on his family farm and then for the railway before his draft notice arrived in January 1942. His service record would note an unusual combination of mechanical aptitude and natural leadership ability. Also arriving was Leonard Smith from New York, William McBurney from Pennsylvania, and Preston McNeil from Texas. These men represented every corner of black America, brought together by war and by a system that segregated them, even as it demanded their service. The battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, was white, one of the few white officers who genuinely believed in his men's capabilities. Bates understood something that most of the Army hierarchy refused to accept. Given proper training and equipment, black soldiers would prove equal to any troops in the world. His challenge was overcoming not enemy forces, but his own military's prejudices. The training regime Bates implemented was deliberately brutal. The 761st trained harder and longer than equivalent white units. They had to. Every mistake would be used as evidence of racial inferiority. Every failure would confirm the prejudices of skeptical superior officers. The pressure was immense, but it forged bonds stronger than steel. The men learned to operate the M5 Stuart light tank at Camp Claiborne, and the Stuart mounted a 37mm gun and 330 caliber machine guns. It was fast, reaching 36 miles per hour, but lightly armored and vulnerable. The tankers practiced maneuvers in the Louisiana heat, learning to coordinate movement, communication, and fire control. They learned gunnery, how to identify targets at range and engage them accurately while moving. They learned maintenance, how to repair tracks, replace road wheels, service engines under field conditions. They learned radio procedure, the precise language that would coordinate tanks across a battlefield. The training was exhausting. Tank interiors in Louisiana summer reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Crews practiced until coordination became instinct. Driver, gunner, loader, and commander had to function as a single organism. A tank commander's order had to be executed instantly. A gunner's aim had to be precise, despite the vehicle's movement. A loader had to feed shells into the gun without pause. A driver had to maneuver through terrain while monitoring engine performance and fuel consumption. They excelled. By August 1942, when the battalion moved to Camp Livingston for large-scale maneuvers, their proficiency ratings matched those of veteran white armored units. Observers noted their discipline, their mechanical skill, their tactical awareness. In mock battles against other units, they performed admirably. Their maintenance records were exemplary. Their gunnery scores were high. By every objective measure, they were ready for combat, but excellence brought no deployment orders. While white tank battalions shipped to North Africa, Italy, and eventually France, the 761st remained stateside. The pattern became clear. The army was willing to train black tankers, but unwilling to commit them to combat. The official reasons varied. Some officers claimed there were not enough black support personnel to sustain a black tank battalion in combat. Others argued that white infantry would not accept black tank support. Still, others simply stated that this was an experiment that needed more observation before field deployment. The real reason was simpler. The army did not believe black soldiers could fight effectively. This belief, rooted in racial prejudice rather than evidence, kept the 761st in training while the war raged overseas. Month after month, the 761st trained. In April 1943, they participated in Third Army maneuvers at Camp Polk. These were large-scale exercises involving thousands of troops, simulating combat conditions across hundreds of square miles of terrain. Again, they performed admirably. Again, they received no orders. The frustration was corrosive. These were men who had volunteered or been drafted to fight fascism, confined to an endless training cycle because of the color of their skin. The irony was not lost on them. They were preparing to fight Nazi racial ideology while experiencing American racial prejudice. The bitter paradox deepened during their time at Fort Hood, Texas. Beginning in September 1943, the 761st was upgraded to M4 Sherman medium tanks. The Sherman mounted a 75mm main gun, later upgraded to 76mm. It featured improved armor, better crew protection, and the firepower to engage German armor effectively. The tank weighed approximately 30 tons and required a 5-man crew. The Sherman was the workhorse of American armored forces, produced in greater numbers than any other American tank during the war. The men threw themselves into mastering the new equipment. The Sherman was more complex than the Stuart, larger, heavier, more powerful. It demanded different handling. Crews learned to manage its wider turning radius, its greater fuel consumption, its more sophisticated fire control systems. They practiced firing the main gun, coordinating with infantry, executing complex tactical maneuvers. They became proficient quickly. Their enthusiasm for finally receiving combat-capable equipment was evident in every training report. But Fort Hood, located in the heart of Jim Crow, Texas, the contradiction between their mission and their treatment became unbearable. They were training to fight for freedom and democracy while experiencing neither. Off-duty, the black soldiers faced segregated facilities everywhere. Separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate waiting rooms. Restaurants refused to serve them. Businesses turned them away. Local police harassed them. White civilians treated them with contempt. On base, conditions were only marginally better. Black soldiers and white soldiers trained separately, ate separately, slept in separate barracks. Even the post-exchange and movie theater were segregated. Black soldiers who had earned the right to wear the uniform of the United States Army were denied basic dignity because of their skin color. One incident crystallized the contradiction. Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, an exceptional athlete who would later break baseball's color barrier, refused to move to the back of a bus on the Fort Hood base in July 1944. His battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bates, supported him, but senior officers intervened, transferred Robinson to another unit, and court-martialed him. Robinson was eventually acquitted, but too late to deploy with the 761st. The message was clear. Black soldiers, no matter how capable, would be treated as second-class citizens. The deployment order finally came in June 1944. After 2.5 years of training, the 761st Tank Battalion was alerted for overseas movement. The men could hardly believe it. The war in Europe had been raging for nearly 5 years. D-Day had occurred on June 6th. Allied forces were establishing themselves in France. The need for armored units was desperate. Finally, the 761st would get their chance to prove what they had been insisting all along. They were ready. On August 27, 1944, they boarded the troop ship Esperance Bay in New York Harbor. 712 men, along with their personal equipment, prepared for the voyage across the Atlantic. They could not bring their tanks. Those would be issued in England, but they brought everything else. Weapons, tools, spare parts, personal gear. The organized chaos of embarkation filled the docks as units loaded supplies and equipment. The Esperance Bay was a British vessel, one of hundreds of ships moving men and material across the Atlantic to feed the war in Europe. The accommodations were cramped. Soldiers slept in bunks stacked 4 high in holds that had been converted to troop quarters. Meals were served in shifts. Space was at a premium. But the men's spirits were high. After years of waiting, they were finally going to war. The 10-day voyage to England gave them time to process what lay ahead. They were about to become the first black armored unit to see combat in the European theater. Other black units had fought before them. The 92nd Infantry Division had seen combat in Italy. Separate black artillery battalions had supported white infantry divisions, but no black tank battalion had yet entered combat in Europe. The 761st would be first. The weight of representation bore heavily on their shoulders. Every action would be scrutinized. Every mistake would be magnified. Success would challenge prevailing assumptions about race. Failure would confirm them. Upon arrival in England, the 761st received the latest version of the Sherman tank, the M4A3, with the upgraded 76mm gun. This was a significant improvement over the 75mm gun they had trained with in Texas. The 76mm had greater armor penetration capability, allowing it to engage German Panthers and Tigers more effectively. The longer gun barrel and improved ammunition gave American tankers a better chance against the heavier German armor they would face in combat. The M4A3 model also featured a more powerful engine, the Ford GAA V8, producing 450 horsepower. This engine gave the Sherman better acceleration and hill climbing ability than earlier models. The improved power plant made the 30-ton tank more responsive in combat, allowing it to maneuver quickly and take advantage of terrain. These improvements mattered. In tank combat, speed and firepower often meant the difference between survival and death. They trained briefly on British soil, familiarizing themselves with the upgraded vehicles, conducting gunnery practice, running tactical exercises. The training was compressed, intense. They had only weeks to master the new equipment before shipping to France. British training areas in southern England echoed with the sound of tank engines and gunfire as American units prepared for combat. The 761st trained alongside white American units and British armored formations. Some white American soldiers expressed surprise at seeing black tankers. Some British soldiers, less affected by American racial attitudes, treated them simply as fellow soldiers. Then they shipped to France. The English Channel crossing was rough. Tank crews, many of whom had never been to sea before their Atlantic voyage, struggled with seasickness as landing craft pitched and rolled in Channel waters. But they made it. On October the 10th, 1944, they came ashore at Omaha Beach 4 months after D-Day. The beachhead was secure, but the remnants of battle still littered the sand. Destroyed equipment, shattered fortifications, and the ghostly atmosphere of ground paid for in blood, the 761st moved quickly inland, traveling by rail and road toward the front lines. On October the 28th, 1944, they reached their assembly area near the French-German border. General George Patton, commander of Third Army, had specifically requested the 761st for his push toward the Siegfried Line. Patton was known for his aggressive armored warfare tactics and his controversial personality. He was also known for his complicated views on race. He had served with Buffalo Soldiers early in his career and respected their fighting ability. Yet he also harbored the prejudices common to his generation and social class. When Patton addressed the 761st on October the 28th, his speech was characteristically blunt. "Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you were not good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I do not care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success. Do not let them down. And damn you, do not let me down." The speech was vintage Patton, mixing profanity, motivation, and acknowledgement of the racial dynamics at play. The men of the 761st understood the subtext. They were on trial. Their performance would be judged not just as soldiers, but as representatives of their entire race. The pressure was immense, but they had trained for this moment for 30 months. On November the 7th, 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion entered combat. Their first objective was the German-held town of Morville-Levi in northeastern France. The town sat astride a key road junction that the Germans had fortified. Previous American attacks had failed to dislodge the defenders. The 761st was attached to the 26th Infantry Division and ordered to break the stalemate. Captain John Long of B Company led the assault. Long was a no-nonsense officer from Detroit who had earned his men's respect through competence and courage. Behind him, Sergeant Roy King commanded the lead Sherman tank. The attack began at dawn. As King's tank entered Morville-Levi, a German soldier armed with a Panzerfaust, an anti-tank rocket launcher, fired from a building. The shaped charge struck the Sherman's flank, disabling the tank and wounding 2 crew members. The situation was critical. The lead tank was immobilized, blocking the narrow street. German defenders were converging on the position. King and his crew dragged the wounded men to cover behind the tank. Then, using small arms and the tank's remaining operational weapons, they killed the Panzerfaust gunner and the crew of a nearby German anti-tank gun. The rest of B Company pushed into the town. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers encountered a German roadblock, a felled tree reinforced with mines blocking the advance. German mortar and small arms fire pinned down the accompanying infantry. The entire attack threatened to bog down. Without hesitation, Rivers dismounted from his tank. Under direct fire, he attached a tow cable to the roadblock and climbed back into his Sherman. His tank dragged the obstacle clear, allowing the column to advance and the infantry to break free from their exposed position. For this action, Rivers would later receive the Silver Star. By the end of the day, November 7th, the 761st had captured Morville-Levi. The Germans had defended stubbornly, but the Black Panthers, as the battalion had nicknamed themselves after their unit insignia, had prevailed. The cost was significant. Sergeant Roy King died of his wounds. Other casualties mounted. But the 761st had proven they could fight. More importantly, they had proven they could win. German prisoners taken at Morville-Levi revealed something unexpected: confusion. Wehrmacht officers had been told that black American soldiers were poorly trained, poorly led, and would break under pressure. Instead, they had encountered a well-coordinated armored infantry team that maneuvered with precision and fought with determination. One captured German officer compared Sergeant King's conduct to that of Russian tank crews under similar circumstances, acknowledging the tactical competence displayed. The 761st pushed forward. On November 8th, they fought at Vic-sur-Seille. On November 9th, they assaulted Château Salins after a 4-hour battle. On November 10th, they captured Dues. Each engagement reinforced the same pattern. The Black Panthers fought effectively, adapted to changing battlefield conditions, and achieved their objectives. At Vic-sur-Seille, they encountered German defensive positions that had repelled previous attacks. The town sat on elevated ground, giving defenders clear fields of fire. German anti-tank guns covered the approach roads. Machine gun positions dominated key intersections. The 761st coordinated with infantry, using smoke to obscure German observation, suppressing defensive positions with tank fire while infantry advanced under cover. They took the town with minimal casualties through superior tactics and coordination. At Château-Salins, they faced a more determined defense. German troops had fortified stone buildings, creating strong points that dominated the town center. Tank main guns proved effective against these positions, reducing them methodically while infantry cleared surrounding structures. The 4-hour battle demonstrated the battalion's growing combat effectiveness. They were learning, adapting, improving with each engagement. The men themselves were surprised by how well they performed under fire. Years of training had prepared them technically, but combat revealed character. Fear was universal, but they functioned despite it. The sounds of battle, the smell of cordite, the sight of casualties, all the sensory overload of combat became manageable through training and leadership. Tank commanders made decisions calmly under fire. Crews executed orders despite danger. The battalion functioned as it had been designed to function. Sergeant Warren Crissy became legendary for his courage. When his Sherman was knocked out by a German anti-tank gun, Crissy jumped out, commandeered a machine gun on a nearby half-track, and used it to eliminate the enemy crew. Then he climbed onto another tank and continued fighting. His actions earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. Crissy's combat record over the entire campaign was extraordinary. He fought at the front continuously, demonstrating tactical skill and personal courage that earned respect from everyone who witnessed it. Tank commanders who served with him recalled his calm under fire, his ability to make quick, tactical decisions, his willingness to expose himself to danger to accomplish the mission. These qualities, repeated across the battalion by dozens of men, defined the unit's character. The 761st was not just one or two exceptional individuals. It was an entire battalion of trained, motivated, capable soldiers who performed their duties under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Every tank crew functioned effectively. Every platoon executed orders professionally. The battalion as a whole achieved its objectives repeatedly against determined opposition. This collective excellence made the unit's achievement significant. It proved that black soldiers in general, not just a few exceptional individuals, could perform as well as any troops in combat. But the most remarkable story of the 761st's early combat belonged to Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. On November the 16th, Rivers was leading a company's advance toward Gaebling when his Sherman struck a mine at a railroad crossing. The explosion tore through the tank's belly armor and sent shrapnel ripping through the crew compartment. Rivers took the worst of it. Metal fragments slashed his leg from knee to thigh, cutting down to the bone. The wound was catastrophic, requiring immediate evacuation. Captain David Williams, the company commander, reached Rivers's position with a medic. They carried morphine to dull the pain before evacuation. Williams later recalled the conversation. "Reuben, you are going back. You have got $1 million wound. This is your ticket home." Rivers refused. He would not accept morphine because he said it would cloud his judgment. He would not accept evacuation because his men needed him. The medics cleaned and dressed the wound, but Rivers could see German artillery observers marking the position. He climbed into another Sherman and took command. Through the night of November 16th, Rivers remained with A Company as they prepared to assault Gaebling. By dawn on November 17th, his leg had swollen grotesquely. Infection was setting in. The wound was turning gangrenous. Every movement caused visible agony. Captain Williams again ordered evacuation. Rivers again refused. "Captain, you know better than that. This is going to be tough." Rivers led the assault into Gaebling. His tank crew later reported that he directed their fire through gritted teeth, sweat pouring down his face from pain and fever. The Germans defended Gaebling fiercely. The 761st lost 3 tanks to anti-tank fire and 1 to mines, just taking the town. Rivers' Sherman engaged enemy positions throughout the day, knocking out machine gun nests and suppressing German infantry. Through November 17th and 18th, Rivers continued commanding his tank. His condition deteriorated rapidly. The infection was spreading. Medical officers who examined him in the field were horrified that he was still fighting. By the morning of November 19th, Rivers was clearly dying. His leg was black with gangrene. Fever racked his body, but a company was ordered to advance toward Bourg-Eltroff, and Rivers refused to be left behind. At dawn, a company pushed out from Goebling. Almost immediately, they came under heavy anti-tank fire from concealed German positions. Captain Williams ordered his tanks to pull back to cover. Rivers radioed that he had located the enemy anti-tank guns. He and another Sherman moved forward to engage, covering the company's withdrawal. The German guns concentrated their fire on the two exposed American tanks. Armor-piercing rounds struck Rivers. Sherman repeatedly. One penetrated the turret. The tank exploded. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers died instantly. Two other crew members were killed. The survivors were wounded. Rivers had fought for 3 days with a wound that should have killed him on day one. His leadership and sacrifice had enabled a company to capture 2 heavily defended towns and inflict significant casualties on German forces. For his actions from November 16th to 19th, Rivers would eventually receive the Medal of Honor, though not until January 1997, 53 years after his death. The 761st Tank Battalion continued fighting. There was no time to process grief. The war demanded constant forward motion. On December 16th, 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive in the West. The Battle of the Bulge caught Allied forces by surprise, creating a dangerous salient in American lines and threatening to reach the port of Antwerp. The 761st was rushed north to help contain the German breakthrough. They were attached to the 87th Infantry Division and thrown into the fight for the Belgian town of Tillet. The movement north was chaotic. Allied forces were scrambling to respond to the surprise German offensive. Roads were clogged with retreating units, refugees, and supply columns. The 761st moved through this chaos, reaching their assembly area on January 6, 1945. They went into action immediately. The battle for Tillet would prove to be one of the fiercest engagements the Black Panthers fought. German SS panzer troops defended the town with fanatical determination. These were elite units, experienced soldiers who had fought on the Eastern Front and knew how to defend against armor. They had prepared Tillet carefully, positioning anti-tank guns to cover approach routes, mining roads, fortifying buildings. They were determined to hold. Winter weather added another layer of misery. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow accumulated to several feet in places. Visibility was often reduced to meters by blowing snow. The cold was brutal. Tank engines struggled to start. Mechanical systems froze. Ammunition had to be warmed before loading or it would jam. Crews wore every layer of clothing available but still suffered from the cold. The Sherman's narrow tracks struggled for traction on frozen ground. Tanks slipped and slid on ice. Drivers fought to maintain control on slopes. The narrow tracks distributed the tank's 30-ton weight over less surface area than wider tracks would have, reducing grip on ice and snow. Movement that would have been simple in summer became treacherous in winter conditions. During the Tillet operation, the 761st encountered something new: psychological warfare directed specifically at them as black soldiers. German radio broadcasts delivered by American-born propagandist Mildred Gillers, known as Axis Sally, jammed American communications channels. Good morning. Negro soldiers of the 761st, I am sorry that you will die today in Tillet. Our fight is not with the Negroes in America, and your fight is not with us. Your fellow Negroes are rioting in Cleveland. Your commander, Captain Williams, is leading you to death and destruction. He is white and not one of you. Your battalion commander, Major George, is also white and not one of you. Leave your tanks now and return home to Cleveland where you are needed, and you will not be killed. The broadcast was accompanied by music from Louis Armstrong, specifically the song, I Cannot Give You Anything But Love, Baby. The psychological operation was sophisticated, designed to exploit racial tensions and convince black soldiers that they were fighting a white man's war. It failed completely. The men of the 761st understood exactly what they were fighting for, not just against Nazi Germany, but against the very racial ideology that Axis Sally's broadcast represented. Tank Commander Frank Cochrane's response, radioed to his company, became legendary. "They have hit me 3 times, but I am still giving them hell." The 761st captured Tillet after days of brutal close-quarters fighting. German defenders were shocked when they surrendered and discovered that black soldiers had defeated them. Many Wehrmacht soldiers had internalized Nazi propaganda so completely that encountering skilled black tankers produced cognitive dissonance. How could an inferior race defeat superior German troops? German prisoners captured by the 761st often displayed visible confusion and fear. One prisoner at Tillet asked, "What are you doing here?" "This is a white man's war." The answer, obvious to everyone except true believers in racial theory, was that Nazi racial ideology was simply wrong. Nazi propaganda about black soldiers being inferior was extensively documented and widespread. The regime had conducted propaganda campaigns depicting black people as subhuman since the 1920s, long before the war began. These campaigns served multiple purposes. They reinforced Nazi racial theories at home. They prepared German soldiers to view their enemies as inferior. They attempted to divide Allied forces by exploiting racial tensions. The regime had spent years building these beliefs. Hitler's Mein Kampf, written in 1925 and 1926, contained explicit references to contamination of the white race through contact with black people. The book argued that racial mixing would lead to the decline of civilization. These ideas were not fringe beliefs, but central Nazi doctrine, taught in schools, preached in propaganda, enforced through law. The Nuremberg laws of 1935, primarily known for targeting Jews, also applied to black people in Germany. People of African descent were classified as racially alien. They faced legal discrimination, social ostracism, and eventually violent persecution. Approximately 500 Afro-Germans, people with one or more African ancestors living in Germany, were forcibly sterilized under Nazi racial hygiene programs between 1937 and 1945. The goal was to prevent what Nazis called racial contamination. During the war, the German military distributed propaganda leaflets to black American soldiers in November 1944, attempting to convince them they were fighting for a nation that oppressed them. These leaflets, examples of which are preserved in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum collection, depicted scenes of lynching and discrimination in America. They asked black soldiers why they were fighting for a country that treated them as second-class citizens. The psychological operation was sophisticated, but ultimately ineffective because it underestimated black soldiers' understanding of what they were fighting against. Nazi cartoons depicted black soldiers as primitives, incapable of modern warfare. German propaganda magazines published illustrations showing black American troops as savage subhuman figures who threatened civilization. These images drew on centuries of racist stereotypes amplified by Nazi ideology. Wehrmacht soldiers were exposed to this propaganda throughout their training and service. Many internalized it completely. The Black Horror on the Rhine propaganda campaign had portrayed African soldiers in the French army during World War I as savages who committed atrocities against German civilians. Though these accusations were largely fabricated, they were widely believed in Germany and formed part of the narrative German soldiers carried into World War II. Wehrmacht training materials reinforced these beliefs, preparing German soldiers to face what they were told would be inferior opponents. German military intelligence assessments of American forces consistently underestimated black units, predicting they would break under pressure and fight poorly. These assessments reflected ideological bias rather than objective analysis. When reality contradicted these predictions, many German soldiers experienced cognitive dissonance that began to crack their faith in Nazi ideology. The 761st continued operations through the winter of 1944 and into 1945. They fought in the Rhineland campaign, breaching the Siegfried Line in March 1945. This accomplishment was particularly significant. The Siegfried Line, known to Germans as the West Wall, was a series of fortifications along Germany's western border. It stretched for nearly 400 miles from the Netherlands to Switzerland. The line consisted of more than 18,000 bunkers, tunnels and tank traps. Concrete fortifications housed anti-tank guns and machine guns with interlocking fields of fire. Dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped concrete obstacles, blocked tank movement. Minefields covered approaches. The Germans had spent years building these defenses and considered them virtually impenetrable. Breaking through required coordinated infantry tank assaults against prepared positions defended by experienced German troops who were now fighting for their homeland. The 761st participated in multiple assaults on Siegfried Line positions. Each attack required meticulous planning. Engineers cleared mines and demolished obstacles under covering fire from tanks. Infantry advanced in close coordination with armor, each supporting the other. Artillery suppressed German defensive positions, while tanks and infantry maneuvered into assault positions. These were set-piece battles, deliberate attacks against prepared defenses. They required patience, coordination, and courage. During the period from March 20th to 23rd, 1945, the 761st achieved one of its most impressive tactical victories. In this four-day operation, they broke through fortified Siegfried Line positions near Rheindurkheim. They inflicted approximately 4,000 enemy casualties, killed and wounded, and captured 3,210 prisoners. German units defending this sector included elements of the Luftwaffe Field Division and Volkssturm militia, as well as regular Wehrmacht infantry. The breakthrough allowed Allied forces to advance deeper into Germany, collapsing German defensive lines and hastening the end of the war. This single operation demonstrated the full evolution of the battalion's combat effectiveness. The inexperienced unit that had entered combat in November had become a veteran formation capable of executing complex, combined arms operations against determined opposition. Their success proved that skill, training, and leadership mattered more than race. The 761st performed this mission repeatedly. Their tactics evolved with experience. They learned to suppress German anti-tank guns with coordinated fire. They developed techniques for clearing towns and fortifications. They became experts at combined arms warfare, integrating their armor with infantry, artillery, and air support. By late March 1945, the Black Panthers were among the most experienced armored units in Patton's Third Army. German prisoners taken by the 761st were treated according to the Geneva Convention with professionalism and humanity. This behavior, so at odds with what German soldiers had been told to expect from black soldiers, created another crack in Nazi ideology. If the Nazis had lied about black soldiers being murderous primitives, what else had they lied about? Some German prisoners later testified that capture by black American troops was the moment they began questioning everything the Third Reich had taught them. At the end of March 1945, the 761st crossed the Rhine River and pushed deep into Germany. The Rhine crossing was a major Allied operation. The river had served as Germany's last major natural defensive barrier in the West. Once across, Allied forces could advance into the industrial heart of Germany. The 761st crossed as part of a massive movement of men and equipment. Engineers had constructed pontoon bridges, traffic control units managed the flow of vehicles. The crossing was orderly, professional, a demonstration of Allied logistical superiority. Over the following weeks, they participated in the encirclement of German forces in the Ruhr pocket. This massive operation trapped hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht and SS troops, effectively ending German capacity to defend Western Germany. The Ruhr was Germany's industrial heartland. Losing it meant losing the capacity to produce weapons, ammunition, and supplies. German forces attempted to break out of the encirclement. They failed. Allied forces tightened the noose methodically. The 761st's role was to maintain pressure on retreating German forces, preventing them from establishing new defensive lines. They conducted pursuit operations, moving rapidly to keep enemy units off balance. They engaged in meeting engagements with German forces, attempting to withdraw. They captured towns whose defenders had not yet received orders to retreat. The pace was exhausting, but exhilarating. After months of slow, grinding combat against prepared defenses, they were now pursuing a broken enemy. They captured dozens of towns whose names blur together in after-action reports. Small German villages, farming communities, industrial suburbs. Each had to be cleared. Each might contain defenders. Tank crews remained alert, despite fatigue, scanning for threats, ready to engage. Infantry followed close behind, clearing buildings, taking prisoners. The routine became familiar. Approach town. Suppress any resistance with tank fire. Infantry moves in, clear structures, move to next objective. They destroyed hundreds of German vehicles. Trucks abandoned by retreating units, staff cars whose officers had fled on foot, half-tracks out of fuel. Artillery pieces left behind. Some were destroyed by tank fire. Others were simply disabled to prevent future use. The roads of Germany in April 1945 were littered with abandoned equipment, evidence of a collapsing army. Throughout the campaign, they maintained operational effectiveness despite equipment wear and continuous combat stress. Tank maintenance was crucial. Tracks wore out, engines needed service, weapons required cleaning, ammunition had to be loaded, fuel had to be found. The maintenance crews and supply personnel who kept the tanks running rarely received recognition. But without them, the combat crews could not have functioned. Their maintenance crews performed miracles, keeping vehicles functional. Working through the night, often under fire, they replaced damaged parts, repaired broken systems, kept the Shermans rolling. Some vehicles that should have been sent to rear area maintenance depots were kept operational through improvisation and determination. Crews cannibalized damaged tanks for parts. They fabricated repairs from available materials. They did whatever was necessary to keep their vehicles in the fight. Their tank commanders adapted to fighting with replacement personnel who arrived with less training than the original battalion members. By April 1945, the battalion's composition had changed significantly. Combat losses and non-battle casualties had been replaced by new personnel. These replacements, often arriving straight from training with no combat experience, had to learn quickly. Veteran crew members taught them. Tank commanders integrated them into their crews. The battalion absorbed these new soldiers and maintained its effectiveness. Their leadership, from Lieutenant Colonel Bates down through company and platoon commanders, held the unit together through sheer force of will. In late April 1945, the 761st received orders to push toward Austria. They were among the first American units to link up with Soviet forces, advancing from the east. On April 26, 1945, tanks of the 761st met Soviet armor near Steyr, Austria. The meeting was symbolic. Allied forces from west and east had split Germany in two. The Third Reich was finished. For the men of the 761st, the encounter with Soviet soldiers proved memorable. Soviet tank crews included women. Leonard Smith, a gunner in the 761st, recalled being embraced by a Russian woman tanker who shouted "America" repeatedly, while nearly crushing him in her enthusiasm. The cultural exchange was brief but meaningful. Soldiers who had fought across thousands of miles to defeat fascism shared a moment of triumph. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe officially ended. The 761st Tank Battalion had been in continuous combat for 183 days. No other American armored unit in the European theater fought for so long without relief. This extraordinary record was officially recognized in the Presidential Unit Citation, signed by President Jimmy Carter in 1978. The statistics of their service were remarkable. They participated in 4 major Allied campaigns: the Northern France Campaign, the Rhineland Campaign, the Ardennes-Alsace Campaign, and the Central Europe Campaign. They fought across 6 countries: France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria. They liberated or captured over 30 towns. Over the course of the entire 183-day campaign, they inflicted approximately 130,000 casualties on German forces through direct combat, artillery coordination, and combined operations with infantry divisions. 3 officers and 31 enlisted men of the 761st were killed in action. 22 officers and 180 enlisted men were wounded. The battalion also suffered 44 non-battle casualties in November 1944 alone, including injuries, illness, and combat fatigue. When including replacements received and subsequently lost over 183 days of continuous combat, the overall casualty rate approached 50%, as stated in the Presidential Unit Citation. For their service, members of the battalion received 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, and approximately 300 Purple Hearts. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers received the Medal of Honor posthumously in 1997, awarded by President Bill Clinton on January 13th of that year. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter awarded the 761st Tank Battalion the Presidential Unit Citation, recognizing their extraordinary heroism and performance. The citation was made official on April 10th, 1978. But the most significant impact of the 761st cannot be measured in statistics. Their combat performance fundamentally challenged racial assumptions that had dominated American military thinking for decades. They had proven that black soldiers, given proper training, equipment, and leadership, performed as well as any troops in the army. This evidence would play a crucial role in the political and military push to desegregate the American armed forces. The return home proved bittersweet for the men of the 761st. They had fought courageously for their country, defeating an enemy dedicated to racial supremacy. They expected recognition, respect, and gratitude. What many received instead was renewed discrimination. Veterans of the 761st returned to a segregated America. They could not eat in certain restaurants, stay in certain hotels, or live in certain neighborhoods. Men who had commanded tanks in combat found themselves relegated to menial jobs. Heroes who had earned Silver Stars faced casual racism from civilians who had never left home. The disconnect was painful and radicalizing. The men of the 761st had risked everything for America. They had proven their worth in the most demanding crucible imaginable. Yet, they still faced second-class citizenship. This experience, shared by thousands of black veterans returning from World War II, fueled the growing civil rights movement. If America could ask black citizens to fight and die for freedom abroad, it could not justifiably deny them freedom at home. The argument became impossible to refute. Black veterans had demonstrated courage, competence, and sacrifice equal to any American soldiers. Denying them equal rights at home while celebrating their victories abroad exposed the moral bankruptcy of segregation. The political pressure became overwhelming. Organizations like the NAACP used the combat records of units like the 761st as evidence in their campaigns for equality. Black newspapers published accounts of battlefield heroism, alongside stories of discrimination at home. The contradiction became too glaring to ignore. Veterans testified before Congress about fighting fascism abroad while facing discrimination at home. Their testimony carried weight that no academic argument could match. They had bled for America. They had proven their worth under fire. They demanded recognition. White veterans also played a role. Many soldiers who had served alongside black support troops or who had been supported by black tank battalions in combat returned home with changed perspectives. They had seen black soldiers fight and die. They had been saved by black tankers. Their testimony challenged the assumptions of those who had never served. Military commanders, including some who had initially opposed black combat troops, submitted reports documenting their effectiveness. The evidence was overwhelming. President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, mandating the desegregation of the United States Armed Forces. The order cited the need for equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race. Truman acted partly from moral conviction and partly from political calculation, but the combat record of units like the 761st provided the empirical justification he needed. The order faced significant resistance. Some military leaders argued that integrated units would harm combat effectiveness. Some Southern politicians threatened political retaliation. Some officers resigned, rather than command integrated units. But the order stood. Implementation was gradual, taking several years to complete fully, but the principle was established. Race would no longer determine military assignments or opportunities. The combat performance of units like the 761st Tank Battalion provided crucial evidence that segregation was not just morally wrong, but militarily ineffective. Integrated units, military studies concluded, would perform at least as well as segregated ones and would better reflect American democratic values. The Project Clear study, conducted by the Army between 1949 and 1951, examined integrated and segregated units in combat during the Korean War. Its findings confirmed what the 761st had already proven. Race had no correlation with combat effectiveness. Training, leadership, and unit cohesion mattered. Skin color did not. The legacy of the 761st extended far beyond military policy. Members of the battalion became educators, business leaders, and civil rights activists. They carried with them the knowledge that they had proven something fundamental. When given equal opportunity, Black Americans achieved at the highest levels. This knowledge, born in combat, shaped the rest of their lives. They returned to communities across America, bringing with them not just combat experience, but a transformed understanding of their own capabilities and their rights as citizens. They had commanded complex machines in battle. They had made life and death decisions under fire. They had proven themselves equal to any soldiers in the world. This experience made them unwilling to accept second-class citizenship quietly. They became activists, educators, community leaders who demanded the equality they had earned through service. Some pursued higher education using the GI Bill. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 provided educational benefits to veterans. For many Black veterans, this represented their first opportunity for college education. They attended historically Black colleges and universities across the South. They enrolled in integrated universities in the North and West. They pursued degrees in engineering, medicine, law, education, business. Their wartime experience had shown them what they could achieve. Their education gave them tools to achieve it. Captain Ivan Harrison, who commanded troops in the 761st, later became a physician. He attended medical school after the war, completed his residency, and practiced medicine for decades. His path from tank commander to doctor exemplified the potential unlocked when barriers fell. Harrison's story was repeated across the battalion. Men who might never have attended college in a segregated America used their veteran benefits and their proven capabilities to build professional careers. Leonard Smith worked for the New York Transit Authority Police, rising to a position of responsibility. He served his community in uniform again, this time as a law enforcement officer rather than a soldier. His military experience prepared him for this role. The discipline, the leadership training, the ability to function under pressure, all skills learned in combat served him well in civilian life. Countless other veterans of the battalion contributed to their communities, carrying with them the pride of having served in a unit that changed history. They joined churches, civic organizations, veterans groups. They coached youth sports teams. They mentored young people. They served on school boards and city councils. They were active, engaged citizens who had earned their citizenship through service and demanded it be respected. Some became teachers, bringing military discipline and high expectations to their classrooms. They taught in segregated schools across the South, preparing the next generation of Black Americans for the opportunities they knew were coming. They taught in integrated schools in the North and West, demonstrating through their own achievements what Black Americans could accomplish. Their presence in these roles challenged stereotypes and opened minds. Others went into business, starting companies, creating jobs, building wealth in their communities. They used skills learned in the Army, organizational ability, leadership, mechanical knowledge to build successful enterprises. They proved that Black Americans could succeed in business just as they had succeeded in combat. Their success created economic opportunity for others and demonstrated pathways to prosperity. In 2005, the United States Army dedicated a monument to the 761st Tank Battalion at Fort Cavazos, Texas, formerly Fort Hood, where the battalion had trained. The monument features 4 black granite tablets surrounding a marble sculpture of a kneeling tanker. Surviving veterans attended the dedication ceremony, many in their 80s, some in wheelchairs, all proud of what they had accomplished 6 decades earlier. The inscription honors their 183 consecutive days of combat without relief and their role in breaking Nazi racial ideology through demonstrated excellence. The 761st Tank Battalion demonstrated through action what words alone could never prove. They showed that courage recognizes no color, that skill is earned through training, not inherited through race. That leadership emerges from character, not complexion. They fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against Nazi Germany across the battlefields of Europe, another against the assumption of black inferiority that pervaded their own society. They won both wars through the same method, relentless excellence under impossible pressure. Every tank battle won became evidence against racial prejudice. Every German position captured became proof of capability. Every day of continuous combat without relief became testimony to endurance and professionalism. The Wehrmacht soldiers, who had been taught that black soldiers were inferior, learned the truth in combat. German troops who expected easy victories against racially inferior opponents discovered, instead, determined, skilled and courageous adversaries who outfought them repeatedly. When German prisoners expressed shock at being captured by black tankers, they were confronting the collapse of an ideology built on lies. When the 761st entered combat on November 7, 1944, they carried more than ammunition and fuel. They carried the hopes of millions of black Americans who wanted the chance to prove their worth. They carried the burden of representation, knowing that their performance would be generalized to judge an entire race. They carried the weight of history, understanding that their actions would shape military policy and civil rights progress for generations. They bore these burdens for 183 consecutive days of combat. They never faltered. They never broke. They never gave their enemies or their doubters any evidence to support racial theories. The Black Panthers of the 761st Tank Battalion proved that Nazi racial ideology was not just morally reprehensible, but factually wrong. In doing so, they helped dismantle similar prejudices within their own nation. And their legacy extends beyond the battlefields of Europe to the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. They demonstrated that when barriers fall and opportunity opens, excellence emerges regardless of race. That lesson, purchased with blood and courage across 183 days of unrelenting combat, remains their greatest victory. The men who served understood what they had accomplished. They had changed not just military history, but American history. They had proven through the ultimate test of combat that the color of a soldier's skin had nothing to do with the content of his character or the quality of his service. They had written with tank treads and cannon fire a truth that could not be denied. They were soldiers. They were Americans. They were heroes. And they had earned every bit of respect that history would eventually grant them. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.